Since we said I do, my husband, a quintessential mama's boy, has been noticeably absent when it comes to household tasks. His reliance on me became glaringly obvious when I brought up an impending business trip. Alarm flashed across his face as he exclaimed, "Who's going to look after me while you're away?" After a fiery dispute, I set off on my week-long trip. Upon my return, I found a note alongside finalized divorce papers. It read, "Since you've neglected the housework, I'm moving back in with my parents. Think about the divorce papers." Fury surged within me at his audacity to threaten divorce. Yet, as I calmed down, a spark of clarity emerged. Perhaps this was the motivation I needed. Maybe getting divorced wasn't such a terrible notion. Determined, I submitted the paperwork the very next day. The next morning, my astonished husband barged in, demanding to know where the divorce documents were. When I informed him I had already filed them, he broke down, utterly bewildered and sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm Grace, and at 32, I've been married just over a year. After completing college, I steadily climbed the corporate ladder, approaching my 30s without a significant other. My parents pushed me to settle down, prompting me to reluctantly join a dating service. There, I met Edward, a soft-spoken man a few years my junior who worked at a mixed firm. We hit it off over several dates, and his respectful nature led me to believe he was the one. When he proposed, I was thrilled, dreaming of our life together. However, our marriage soon revealed challenges I hadn't expected. During our engagement, while visiting my parents, they emphasized that marriage is a lifelong commitment. "Grace, always support Edward," they advised, and I nodded as Edward listened intently. Next, we visited Edward's parents. His father, Arthur, greeted me warmly, saying, "I've heard so much about you from my son. It's wonderful to finally meet you." His mother, Michelle, was more reserved, examining me before asking, "Is this the one?" Edward confidently responded, "Yep, Mommy, I want to marry her." I was taken aback by his use of Mommy and Michelle's forthrightness. Arthur quickly intervened, apologizing for her bluntness and reassuring me they were very happy about our marriage. But just so I was aware, Edward has had it pretty easy here. He might be a bit challenging. I reassured them that I loved Edward's gentle nature and knew we would support one another. Arthur turned to Edward, encouraging him to step up and keep me happy. Edward nodded earnestly, and soon after, we celebrated our wedding with a simple ceremony. To our delight, my parents gifted us a condo, marking the start of our life together. However, it soon became clear that Edward was not accustomed to handling household chores. One morning, while I was busy doing laundry and cooking breakfast, Edward's alarm went off at 8, yet he continued to sleep soundly. Despite my efforts to rouse him, he wouldn't budge. Finally, I pulled off his covers and gave him a gentle shake. Slowly, he opened his eyes, grumbling, "Wow, it's already 8:10. Why didn't you wake me?" I reminded him that I had tried and that his alarm was blaring too. "Now, please eat your breakfast." As he rubbed his eyes and shuffled to the table, he immediately complained about the eggs. "Hey Grace, this egg is too runny. I can't eat this unless it's well done. Make it over," he demanded. Caught off guard while I hung the laundry, I struggled to contain my annoyance and snapped, "Then don't eat it." "Why would you say that? And this coffee is scalding hot. Mommy always made the eggs and coffee just right." Fine, I sighed, quickly redoing the eggs and letting the coffee cool. He ate hastily, leaving his plate on the table as he dashed toward the restroom. "Wait, you know you should clean up after yourself," I called after him, but he brushed off my concerns. "Gee, I'm short on time." Annoyed, I paused my makeup routine to do the dishes while choosing my outfit. Then he called, "Grace, over here, help with my tie." There he stood, tie hanging loosely around his neck, looking utterly helpless. "Seriously? You can't even tie your own tie? What did you do before we got married?" "Mommy always did it," he replied sheepishly. Taking a deep breath, I tied his tie, and somehow we both managed to leave the house. This had become our routine. He never contributed to any housework, and it felt as though I was juggling everything while babysitting him too. Whenever an issue arose, it was always, "Mommy did it this way," or "with Mommy, it went like that," constantly referring back to his mother, Michelle. This pattern dragged on for a year, and as the pressures built, Thoughts of divorce began to invade my mind. My father's insistence that marriage is forever echoed in my thoughts, keeping my frustrations in check. However, an unexpected twist at work led to a week-long business trip starting the following day. When I broke the news to my husband that evening, he paused his video game, clearly taken aback. "Wait, a whole week for a business trip? It's out of my hands. Work's calling," I explained. "No way. Who's going to take care of you here for a week?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "You need to step up. It's about time you took charge of the household duties," I responded. He sat down, controller in hand, locking eyes with me. "Isn't the wife supposed to care for her husband at home? Are you just abandoning that?" His question was steeped in outdated expectations. "Seriously? That's such an antiquated mindset. We both have jobs. We should be a team," I countered. "That's not how I see it. Mommy always managed everything at home," he retorted. I couldn't help but point out. "But she was a stay-at-home mom. Honestly, it's kind of strange hearing an adult man constantly refer to mommy." He bristled at my words. "What's your issue? Taking jabs at me and my mommy?" "I'm not, but let's face it. You're a mama's boy. This is how you view me. Do you really think you can talk to me like that?" His defensiveness intensified, and I felt my frustration reach its peak. "Admit it. You're a mama's boy. You can't get up without help. You can't even tie your tie. And you won't lift a finger around the house. You're always comparing me to your mom. For once, take responsibility." "Really? You're going to come at me like that?" That's why I had doubts about marrying someone older. I should have sided with mommy and chosen a younger, more lively girl, he shot back. His words hit hard, and our conversation escalated into a major argument. "Even joking. You shouldn't say things like that. We're married," I said, trying to ground the conversation in the commitment we made to each other. The tension was thick, exposing the deep fractures in our relationship. When my husband hinted at divorce during our heated exchange, I was taken aback. With a smug tone, he challenged, "You can't actually want a divorce, can you? You'd want that label? And think about what your dad said about staying together." Then, with a sharp edge, he added, "Well, I just did. If you go on this business trip and leave me here alone, I'm seriously contemplating a divorce." With those words, he stormed off to our bedroom, leaving me stunned. Despite the shock, the thought of divorce lingered in my mind, a consideration I had previously wrestled with, fearing I would let my parents down. But now, it felt like a genuine option. Heavily burdened by these thoughts, I went to bed. The following day, I woke up early to get ready for my trip. The lingering tension from our argument still weighed on me, but I had work obligations to fulfill. I nudged Edward, who remained tucked under the covers. "I'm leaving now. You'd better get up, or you'll be late for work." He mumbled something incoherent in response, dismissing me with a sleepy murmur. Sighing, I headed out. A few hours later, I received a text from him. "You barely tried to wake me. Now I'm running late. Did you really go on that trip?" I quickly typed back, "I did wake you. And yes, I'm on my trip. I'll be back in a week." He read my message but didn't respond. While I was away, I decided to call my parents to discuss Edward's behavior and my increasing thoughts about divorce. I braced myself for a lecture, uncertain of how they would react to the idea of my marriage ending. I knew the conversation would be tough, but I needed their support and guidance. Their reaction surprised me. "We had no idea he was acting this way. Take your time to think it over, but don't feel trapped in a situation that isn't right for you. Remember, we're always here for you, no matter what you decide." Their unconditional support brought tears to my eyes. Upon returning from my trip, I felt a mix of clarity and determination. I understood that a serious discussion with Edward was unavoidable. If he showed no signs of change, I was prepared to take divorce into serious consideration. As I walked into our home late that evening, I noticed that Edward wasn't there. My gaze fell on a set of signed divorce papers and a note on the table that read, "Since you skipped the housework, I'm going back to my parents' place. Look over the divorce papers and think about it." My first reaction was one of anger. How could he threaten me with divorce? But as my fury faded, I began to reconsider the situation. Perhaps this was a sign that ending things might not be such a terrible idea after all. With that realization, I resolved to file the papers. Once the divorce was finalized, I felt an immense burden lift from my shoulders. That night, I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in ages. The next morning, while enjoying a quiet cup of coffee, Edward stormed in, clearly upset. "Why didn't you come to my parents' place to apologize? What's wrong with you?" he demanded, his temper rising. Upon noticing the absence of the divorce papers, his expression shifted from anger to disbelief. "Wait, where are the divorce papers?" "Oh, I filed them," I responded calmly. "You did what?" He looked stunned. "You went through with it? Thanks for signing them. That made everything easier," I said, maintaining my composure. "You can't be serious. Did you really go through with it? Have you lost your mind?" he shouted, unable to conceal his shock at my decisiveness. My calm demeanor only fueled his frenzy. "That's it, I'm calling my parents." "Go ahead, do what you want," I replied, unfazed by his threats. I knew I had made the right choice for myself. An hour later, I felt a sense of clarity when Edward's parents, Michelle and Arthur, arrived at our apartment. Michelle spotted me immediately and exclaimed dramatically, How could you just divorce Edward like this? What's wrong with you?" I replied coolly, "If he had the divorce papers all filled out and ready, doesn't that indicate he wanted out? Is that a problem? How can you be so brazen when you're just his wife?" she retorted. Before things escalated, Arthur intervened, his voice commanding enough to silence the room. "Grace, could you explain what happened?" I nodded and recounted the ongoing issues, our argument before my trip, and the divorce papers Edward had left for me. I was at my wit's end. It seemed like he wanted a divorce, so I went along with it. I held Arthur's gaze, hoping to convey my frustration. Just as I finished, Edward interrupted. "Mom, Dad, can't you see she's out of line? Tell her off." Michelle quickly sided with Edward. "Oh, Edward, my poor baby, she's being so hasty. You should reverse the divorce right now." "There's no reversing it. Our divorce is final. We're strangers now," I asserted firmly. Michelle's face flushed with anger, and she opened her mouth to respond. But Arthur cut her off again. "Enough, Michelle." He turned to me, offering apologies for Edward's behavior. Then, facing Edward, whose eyes were wide with shock, Arthur continued, "You fool, I knew you had issues. But this, using divorce papers as a threat? Unbelievable. You brought this on yourself." Michelle attempted to interject, but Arthur pressed on. "This is partly your fault, Michelle. You spoiled him. Be careful. If this continues, I might divorce you too." The tension in the room was thick as Arthur confronted the reality of the situation, leaving Edward and Michelle speechless. After the intense exchange, Michelle appeared shaken, her mind occupied with Arthur's unexpected divorce threat. She murmured to herself, visibly troubled. Arthur then turned back to me, his expression filled with genuine regret. "Grace, I'm truly sorry for the trouble our clueless son has caused you. It's evident he has much to learn. Please move forward and seek happiness in your life," Arthur implored. His concern was sincere. I thanked him for his understanding and watched as he left, taking a dejected Edward with him. It didn't take long for the news to circulate in our circle. Arthur had chosen to sever financial and emotional ties with Edward, a drastic move aimed at forcing him toward independence. Before long, Edward's life took a downward spiral. He moved into a small, run-down apartment, his first real experience living alone. The transition was anything but smooth. His new living situation quickly descended into disorder, mirroring his chaotic personal life. With no one to lean on and a habit of tardiness, he soon found himself unemployed, struggling to keep a schedule. Meanwhile, the dynamics within his family deteriorated further. Michelle, who had always meddled in Edward's affairs, crossed boundaries one too many times, resulting in serious fallout with Arthur. This ultimately led to their separation. Michelle moved in with Edward, and together they battled to find stability, scraping by with low-wage jobs. Their lives turned into a series of unfortunate events and poor choices, with no clear path toward improvement. In contrast, my life took a different trajectory. Freed from the daily stresses and emotional toll of my relationship with Edward, I found myself alone in our condo, which now felt unexpectedly spacious and full of possibilities. With renewed energy and focus, I dedicated myself to my career. The absence of Edward's negativity allowed me to excel professionally. feeling liberated and optimistic. I embraced my newfound independence. My living space transformed into a true sanctuary where I could unwind and plan for the future. The improvements in my work life were evident. Each day brought excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. The contrast between my flourishing existence and Edward and Michelle's downward spiral was striking. While they were no longer part of my life, the lessons learned from our time together resonated deeply, solidifying my commitment to personal growth and happiness. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay amazed.